Hi, my name is Nicole Terflo, and I'm going to be looking at the poem A Bronzeville Mother Loiters in Mississippi. Meanwhile, a Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon by Gwendolyn Brooks. And a little bit of context behind the poem is this poem is part of the Bean Eaters collection by Gwendolyn Brooks, and one of Gwendolyn Brooks' styles is that she takes on the persona of a person. And so in this particular poem, Brooks takes on the persona of Carolyn Bryant, who was directly involved in the murder of Emmett Till. And this poem was written after the incident involving Emmett Till, Roy Bryant, his brother, and Carolyn Bryant. So, in this poem, I interpreted that in this section, the last 30 lines of the poem, that the speaker, Carolyn Bryant, is realizing that she can no longer romanticize the situation, and she feels similar to a powerless victim, but stays in her role as dutiful wife. So I'm going to be looking at this through the shift in the fairy tale extended metaphor, the red motif and violent diction, and the ironic use of the ballad structure. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the shift in the fairy tale extended metaphor. So in the beginning of the poem, there was a line explaining this metaphor, which is the milk-white maid, the maid mild of the ballad, pursued by the dark villain, rescued by the fine prince. And in this metaphor, the maid mild is the mother, Carolyn Bryant, or the speaker. The fine prince is her husband, Roy Bryant, and the dark villain is Emmett Till, a 14-year-old child. And this is used in the beginning to support the illusion the mother has about the murder, that she was the victim, her husband was the hero, and Emmett Till was in the wrong as the villain. But now in this part of the poem, it says, when talking about the fine prince, it says, she heard no hoofbeat of the horse, saw no flash of the shining steel. And I saw this to mean that she no longer sees him as her knight in shining armor, and does not see herself as the damsel in distress, because she has realized that he is not the man that she thought he was, and that she is getting a conscience and realizing that what he did, even though it seemed like he did it for her, was not good and was something to be frightened of rather than to be proud of. Because in the beginning she was not seeing reality, and this metaphor was a way for her to protect herself from facing the truth or feeling the emotion or accepting the blame of the murder. So this, at the end, she breaks apart the metaphor, and he tries to comfort her by saying something about love and night and intention, that he did it for her and that this should comfort her, but it doesn't help. So not only is this a shift in the metaphor, but it's a shift in her tone. She's scared of him and afraid of what he will do to her if she doesn't stop playing the role of the maid mild. So instead of enjoying the role, she's now trapped in it because she feels guilty. And this directly leads into the violent diction, and the red motif that I'm going to talk about. So in this poem, it says, suddenly she felt his hands upon her. Her shoulders were gripped. He pulled her face. There were decapitated exclamation points, and a hatred for him burst. So in all these instances of violent diction, like he felt his hands upon her, we have the word his, or his, he, and him. So him and he and his all being her fine prince, quote unquote, who she now sees as, in a sense, the villain. So this violent diction further reinforces the belief that she perceives her once adored husband as someone who could hurt her. So every instance has a violent diction is in a sentence with the word him, and she sees herself and her children, because previously in the poem, in the previous few lines, her husband slapped one of her kids, and now she is being gripped in the claim of his hands, and he pulling her, and she felt his hands upon her. Now she sees herself as the victim, and a victim of the fantasy that she once envisioned. And we can also see this from the red motif. So red in this sense being the blood, and which is also an allusion to the murder of Emmett Till, because now every time that he touches her, she sees blood, and she sees the red ooze. And the red ooze that was seeping, spreading darkly over her white shoulders and all over Earth and Mars. So this is also can be seen as, or I interpret it as, the blood on her hands that she sees, or that she sees only when she looks at him. She realizes that there's blood on his and her hands. And when he grips her and the red ooze goes over her shoulders, she is being encompassed by him, and she's constrained. And we have she is encompassed by the blood, which likens her to Emmett Till, and also likens her to being a victim. So also there's this hyperbole of the blood is spreading all over Earth and Mars, meaning that the universe is tainted, and if consequently if that is correct, then she is tainted, which makes her resent the Fine Prince, and everything about him reminds her of the murder. And the last point I want to talk about is the irony of the ballad structure. So in this poem, the ballad coincides with the metaphor in the beginning of the maid mild and the dark villain and the Fine Prince. But the complex syntax is not consistent with the true ballad, and neither is the content of the poem, because during the poem, the speaker shifts away from this ballad and romanticized structure and starts to realize that the ballad, or that this metaphor is not true, and that no longer is her husband the Fine Prince, but rather someone she is afraid of and is in fact the villain. So this is irony, because although the speaker wants so badly to create a fantasy and to be a part of the ballad, the structure and her realizations during the poem do just the opposite. If the ballad were true, she would stay content as a maid mild, but since her metaphor and fantasy breaks apart, she is not content. She yearns to voice her opinion when she says she did not scream, she stood there, but a hatred for him burst into glorious flowers. She keeps it all inside, and she is a passive figure because she cannot speak, because she's still being encompassed by these archetypal roles where she is the subservient woman to an all-powerful husband. And I believe this is where, because she is staying in this role of the dutiful wife, she is using self-pity to get the reader to think that Brooks is trying to write this poem to show sympathy for her, when in fact I interpret it as this is where the ideas of the speaker that is trying to convey contrasts with the idea that Brooks is trying to convey. The speaker is trying to wallow in self-pity and not accept responsibility for her role, while simultaneously putting the blame on her husband, when in fact I believe that Brooks is trying to say that that Carolyn Bryant, or the mother, has to shoulder some of the blame for the violence, because in these days women, lots of crimes were committed in the name of women, and I believe that in this section, Brooks is saying that women have to shoulder some of the blame for the violence that happens, even though the speaker in the poem is contrasting this with her ideas that her husband is at fault and that she does not want to accept responsibility for any of these actions and would rather just remain a passive and silent in passive and silent hatred of her husband. And that's it.